Hey guys, this video is going to be all about this idea that we do not have even resources everywhere under the earth. All right, like if I started digging a hole right underneath me right now, I would not necessarily come across the same things in the same amounts as somebody in another place in the world. Okay, so this PowerPoint, forewarning, is a little bit beyond what you guys need to know. So be sure to just focus on what I'm saying, right? So kind of taking a look at why we don't have the same resources beneath our feet. We have to kind of look at this idea that the Earth is moving, right? The Earth has a lot of stuff going on. Not only are we flying through space, but the Earth is also rotating. That rotation gives us this concept of plate tectonics, where the actual crust of the Earth that we are standing on is moving on top of magma, which actually has the land that we are living on or standing on is actually moving while the planet rotates, while the planet flies through space. So there's a lot going on. On top of that, we have volcanoes, earthquakes, any other major processes that would disturb the earth, like human caused things. Anytime we're drilling for oil, we're definitely changing the composition of the earth, or if we're mining for a mineral. So we're going to take a look at that in this PowerPoint. Okay, so kind of a little piece of evidence that shows that there are not an even distribution of resources beneath our feet. We have like minerals such as gold are in higher quantities or more amounts in different parts of the earth. So the top gold producers on earth right now are South Africa, Australia, United States, and Canada. And to kind of make this a little bit more small scale, so it's a little bit more true for us, think about like the gold rush in California, right? Or like Nevada, we're known as the Silver State. We had a lot of silver in these hills. There was gold in the hills around us. So a lot of people came here to mine, whereas if they just started digging a hole in, say, Ohio, they weren't going to find any gold or any silver, right? So that kind of shows that we had different minerals than they had. And we're even in the same country. We're only separated by states, and amplify that to the whole world where you have countries that are thousands of miles away. It makes sense that there would be things in different amounts in different places. So here's a look at a gold mine in South Dakota. You can definitely see the environmental impacts where the hills used to look like these hills over here, right? And now they cut and they just cut these steps into them, and they cut in as they go, looking for gold. Kind of just going to buzz through here a little bit. This is just a little bit of a look at the crust in the upper mantle. We're going to talk about the rock cycle in a little bit. That's not one of our standards. You guys did that in 6th grade. But the rock cycle is a major factor in the distribution of Earth's resources. So kind of just going through, looking at these pictures. It's a good representation of the Earth. We see the inner core, we see the outer core, and we see the mantle, right? From 6th grade, we should remember the currents in the mantle are what pushes the Earth, the crust along that mantle. So we'll have certain parts where the Earth will be pulling apart because the magma underneath is cycling away from itself, right? And that'll cause the Earth to separate, where we'll make big valleys. Ocean canyons, like the Mariana Trench. We also have other portions where the Earth will start to push together, right? We call that a convergent boundary. And when it pushes together, we get things like mountains. And then we also have a slip strike fault, which is when the plates, I'll hold my hands up like this, when the plates slide past each other this way. So that's typically where we get very, very major earthquakes, are on those slip strike faults. These are the look at the major plates in the world. So we are on the North American plate. This is us right here. And then there's the South American plate. Okay, the Pacific Plate. The Pacific Plate is where we have the Ring of Fire. It's where all the major earthquakes are, as along the Pacific Plate. Views in a little bit. So here's a look at the San Andreas Fault in California. This is the fault that's responsible for all the major California earthquakes, and we've definitely felt earthquakes from there all the way here in Reno. All right, so something to kind of look at. This is just a picture of a rock, and then it's talking about 3 different processes happening to it. And this is very important to think about. All resources really can kind of come down to rocks like this, if you think about it. So we talked about how gold and silver is found in higher amounts in certain places. The same is found for other rocks too. So if we think about sand or we think about soil, that comes from rocks that have been broken down. So to have very good soil, you need to have specific rocks, right? And then in addition to that, we need to have the right amount of water and the right amount of life so that these living things are dying in the soil and breaking down and adding nutrients. So a lot of things, a lot of factors need to go into this to determine what type of soil you have in a certain area, right? And if we think about that, being from Reno, kind of in the California area, we can think about farming. There are certain areas in Reno you could dig a hole and plant some vegetables and it would grow fantastic. There are other places where you wouldn't, right? Think about the middle of Nevada where it's just the desert, there's no water. You plant a tomato there, it's not growing, right? We go down, find some nice lush soil in California, plant that tomato, and boom, we're going to have a nice plant. Okay, so what I'm getting to is this is just a big rock, okay? Certain like physical processes such as wind, rain, going from hot to cold, causing it to expand and shrink, water landing on it and freezing and then melting, just little things that would cause a rock to break. We also would have chemical weathering, right? We talked about chemical reactions, and we're going to be doing some chemical reactions as well. But things like, rain sometimes has acidic properties. That acid would break down the rock over time. Different gases, think about, like smoke in the air, whatever else might happen. Biological weathering, like a plant grows and breaks the rock in half with its roots. Right? You could have some animals or some bugs that are burrowing into the rock, breaking it up. And what we would get is we'd get that rock to break down, and then we would have these particles of the parent material. This is just the first step in making soil, right? So we think like if a rock broke up, that would be sand. If that sand keeps breaking up and gets very, very fine, we're going to have soil. Whether that's good soil or bad soil kind of depends on the rocks. I know soil is kind of a boring way of looking at it, right? It's not as exciting as talking about the gold and silver, but it's true because if you have a bunch of, rocks that aren't going to lead to very good soil, chances of animals and plants and stuff calling that place home is very small, right? And then we might end up with places like Death Valley where there's not a lot of animals, not a lot of plants. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the ecosystem there where it's very hot and sunny, but whereas another area like the foothills of California, right, it gets nice weather, it gets rain, it gets water, it has trees, it has animals. That soil has all sorts of rocks from Mount Rose, which used to be volcanic. And then we have the animals dying in the soil. Obviously, the dirt is going to be quite a bit better, quite a bit more hospitable for things to grow, for things to live. Okay, so main idea what we're trying to get to is there is not the same stuff under our feet as under someone's feet in, say, Japan, right? We could have a lot of similar rocks. We could have similar ecosystems. We could have similar environments, but just based on having all the processes over time and all the processes that are still occurring, think about an earthquake that causes a rock slide, right? Think about a volcano. An area that has a ton of volcanoes is going to be getting new rocks all the time. It's going to be getting new minerals. Whereas a place that doesn't have any volcanoes, the rocks that are there are probably the rocks that have been there for millions and millions, if not billions of years. Okay, so it's really important to just kind of keep that in mind, where just like, there's different food resources, or there's different animals in different area, there's different plants in different areas. Those are resources as well, right? So when we think about that, you're already thinking along the same lines, but now we're kind of turning that thinking towards, all right, well, what about the minerals in the ground? What about the oil underground? Okay, well, oil comes from blubbery sea animals that die and get buried and break down over time. Well, if you're in an area that's never had any oceans, you're probably not going to have any blubbery sea animals underground, right? So you're probably not going to have a lot of oil reserves. Whereas a country that was once an ocean, that's now not an ocean, is probably going to have a ton of blubbery animals under there. It's going to have a lot of oil. Okay, or just like an area that has a lot of trees, a lot of forests, is going to have a lot of timber resources, whereas the Sahara Desert doesn't have that. Okay, so it's important to think about that. And then a lot of that stuff is just like financial repercussions, right? Like the countries can mine that stuff and sell that stuff and use that stuff. But in a lot of cases, it's also life and death, right? If we're talking about food, or if we're talking about water resources, a lot of countries don't have access to fresh water based on where they're located geographically, right? A couple summers ago, it got really dicey in a couple countries to where they were having active water rations, where people had to meet in the morning before they went to work or did anything, and they would be given, a half gallon to a gallon of water, and that was your water for the entire day. Whether you needed to drink, to eat, to bathe, to cook, whatever. So a lot of these things are important. And so when we talk about, like conserving resources and whatnot, back in the day, the oceans, we used to just dump trash in the oceans, dump trash in the rivers. Oh yeah, the water's going to take it somewhere else. Whereas now we kind of know, we have a better idea that the earth is connected to itself all over the place. But it is true, just because we have Lake Tahoe right up the street doesn't mean we should just let our faucets flow all day, right? Because for one, the water's not coming directly from Lake Tahoe, right? It's taken a roundabout way. But just because we have access to something doesn't mean that we will have access to it forever, right? As the earth changes, we know Nevada used to be underwater. There used to be water all over. But now it's not. We have a big old desert in the middle. Okay, so just kind of thinking about that stuff, about how these resources, they're not evenly distributed. It's not the same everywhere. And then kind of thinking about why. All sorts of different processes: volcanoes, earthquakes, humans mining, plate tectonics, erosion. Simple mountains breaking down over time while the plates are building, right? And our mountains are getting bigger and rocks are falling down and tumbling. Thinking about if this mountain comes up, right in between two major cities, you could have a major city that's completely cut off from a water source, a million years down the road. Video of about 13 and a half minutes, it looks like. I'm only going to give you guys about 6 or 7 questions for this one. So, again, main idea here: resources around the world, they're not even. And then some evidence of why, or some evidence to show that's true. We could talk about, gold and silver. There's more in Reno than there is in Wisconsin. Or talk about groundwater, or water access in general. Reno has a lot more water than, say, Phoenix. Phoenix and Las Vegas, they have to have their water brought in from outside. Obviously, Vegas has the Colorado River, but that's evidence right there that cities don't have access to the same water, right? And then why? Well, there's been millions and millions and millions of years of these crazy earth processes like volcanoes, earthquakes, all that stuff we talked about. Not to mention, the crust is moving around the world, right? As magma is moving in those convection currents underneath, the world's moving, the earth is moving. So stuff's not even. Save what you got. Good luck getting the questions done. See ya.